do this. I'll tell you what he said, more or less. We discussed his structure, where he gives you, that's why if you see in Aleph and Bez, where he gives you like the received opinion, and then he tries to prove it as much as possible. Then,
just to refresh my memory, we said that for Sadia, the original principle of the soul is derived from the pasuk. The destiny of the soul is also pasuk related, but how the process takes place.
Yeah, he doesn't. What I said was and this is me explaining. He doesn't say this explicitly. Unlike in other subjects where he would definitely have two parallel ways of showing everything about it, like the creation of the world. We know both from the pasuk, which is one source, and we also know it in a purely philosophical, rational way, from just going through the discussion. That is not true in the same way for the soul, at least in the sense that we still might know that it exists, but with the most important thing, which is really important for religious purposes, which is that we also know that it's created, just because it's another thing, and since we know everything is created, so we know that. So these are the two important things that we know about it, entirely rationally. We might also know semi-rationally what it is, or maybe things entirely rationally, like history of the soul being some kind of matter or shiny object, like you say. That he sort of thinks we know, or at least he can show that that's the best theory between all the other theories, which is for him pretty much good enough. Because that's basically what he does in everything in all the other subjects. Yeah, I'm doing a class. I get to know this guy. Okay? You close the door, please. But we cannot know, and this is really sort of important, we cannot know the most important things. For religious purposes, the most important things about the soul is that it receives reward and punishment, gemul, and that he doesn't really prove. Or second thing, and for that to work, we need chesed, we need soul to be able to come back into a body, and those two things he can only show that they're possible. No, they're possible. We have to show that they're possible. They would be impossible. If they would be if they would be impossible, then we would not be able to believe the pasuk. We would have to say the pasuk is a mushal, and then we would do something else. But since it's possible, then he's fine with believing what the pasuk, or more exactly what Chazal say. Then, so what we did was we went through these two parts, more or less in the second. What I wrote in letter B is over here. Is him sort of going through different theories of what the soul is. Now there's three main divisions in this, right? One theory would be the soul is an uncreated kind of thing.
But it's eternal.
Yeah, eternal in the sense of not being created, right? Eternal in the future is not the same thing. Eternal in the past, right? You can have all the kind of versions of that also. Eternal in the past, that is, or part of God, or all kind of things like that, and that he just relegates. Says refer back to chapter 1 or Mamer 1, however you want to call it, where he discussed that nothing can be that way, and therefore the soul can't be that way either, because it just doesn't make sense. So that we solve the problem. We know that the soul is created, just like because it's a thing, and everything is created, because nothing else can exist. The other option which people would have is that the soul is a part of God. That doesn't make sense because God doesn't have parts, so therefore that's not true either. Then we have two main kinds of theories about the soul itself. One theory is that it's an accident of the body, what he calls mikra of the gift, and he denies that principle. He thinks that 5 different theories that are found in the in the literature are more or less different elaborations of that basic theory that the soul is an accident of the body, including the plain theory of the soul being the form of the body, because he doesn't believe in forms. He thinks that forms are just an accident too. So that's really not. But we went through this, I think. If not, then tell me. Somewhat. In any case, but he basically thinks that the soul can't be an accident, mostly for 2 reasons. One is a basic reason, which is more or less like close to Socrates' thing, but not the same, which is that soul is smart and accidents are not smart. In other words, one of the main points of the soul is to have a subject for wisdom, and not only wisdom, virtues and things like that, and that doesn't really work for an accident.
Why not?
That's what he says. The accidents don't. I think mostly closer to the second thing, because then the second thing is like a technical philosophical things where he says that accidents don't have other accidents, and since the soul obviously has accidents, because we can say a smart soul, a stupid soul, a good soul, a bad soul, then the soul is not itself an accident. But that's just a Kalam assumption that accidents don't have other accidents. The Aristotelians don't agree with this.
Right.
So that's not a good proof. But it seems to be sort of what's underlying the first argument also, at least in some sense, where accident is sort of nothing. That's the problem with an accident. Well, for him, it's sort of something, but it's basically nothing. And nothing is not a very good, doesn't really answer the question that the soul is here to answer. That's really what he thinks.
Thing, right? A little bit, maybe?
The way he puts it, yes. I think that there's a better argument there also. I think that there's a better argument where you say, like, it seemed like he says earlier, but later he says things like this. The soul, whatever it is, what we're looking for in the soul needs to be the cause of other things. And an accident is not the cause of anything. It's something caused, almost by definition. It could be that God caused it. I don't think it's only about intelligence. That's what I'm saying. I think he says it that way, but I think it's about anything really. Yeah, that doesn't make sense because then intelligence wouldn't be a thing that exists. What we really need, and we have to go back, what the question of the soul is. The question that we try to answer when we try to talk about a soul is that this living body is different in many ways than non-living bodies, or living person, if you want to restrict yourself to people. And living people are different than other things, firstly by biological things, which is one important thing. They do a lot of complicated things, and complicated is not a word I would say, but a lot of smart things, really. That's really what he means by wisdom, which don't seem to be something that dead matter or matter by itself can do. And therefore, it doesn't really make sense to have the soul, and this is what he says later, to have the soul the result of that, because that's what the soul is trying to explain. In other words, when you say accident, the basic theory of accident will be something like what Socrates has someone argue in the Phaedo, which is it's like an attunement, like the organization or the synchronicity of all the parts of the body. So in other words, the fact that the body is organized in a certain way and works in a certain way, we just call that soul. That's an accident, like the organization of the body, or he has 5 different versions of this, but all turn out to be a version of sort of this. The organization of the body, or the working of the body in a certain way, that's what we call soul. In other words, soul doesn't really exist. It's just exactly. It's when you have a bunch of little bodies, parts of a body working in that way, that's a living body, and that's a soul. The problem with that is that it doesn't really explain anything. It's basically saying, in other words, it's explaining it away. Like, if you think about it as like some kind of reductionism, it's explaining it away. It's saying, well, the soul does not exist. In other words, living bodies don't exist. Everything is really dead. And the fact that we call something seem to be living to us is just because it's like an emergent property, right? Like, don't say the words from people 1,000 years later. But it's just something that that ends up not existing. And that ends up being circular. In other words, it ends up not explaining everything. Because you asked the question, what explains life? And then you said, well, life is just the life of material, of matter. And then you just basically, he doesn't even go this far, but he just stops right here and says, then you didn't explain anything. In other words, if I ask you, that's what he means by wisdom. Wisdom in the sense of the soul is whatever it is that makes the body breathe and regulate its food intake and grow, and all the things that bodies do, which need an explanation or need a cause. And then the soul needs to have some kind of principle and some kind of power to do all these things.
Just naming it is insufficient.
Well, then you just say that then there's no soul. That's basically what it is. Then you just said. Then the question was. Then you end up go back to you're back at the question. So what is it?
No, you're replacing soul with the law, right?
Well, that law doesn't explain anything.
No.
Yeah, if you think that things don't need explanation, if you think that things don't need explanation, then we could go to sleep. But if you think that things need explanation, that's nothing. That goes back to we can't. That's why you're not allowed to jump so much.
Second, there is a theory that says that the whole part of the body is accidental, and the soul is the makeup of the body.
Yeah, there's a theory like that.
The soul is not accidental?
No, because the soul is just, the question is what soul is. Oh yeah, we can't repeat everything. Right, but soul meaning the question that the soul answers. When we say soul in this sense, you have to remember that soul is not the soul. It's life. You have to replace it with the word life. In other words, what is life, or what is living body? Right. And living body can be just an accident of body. The livingness, or that's what the soul is.
The soul is the makeup of the body.
Yeah. It's a weird word to say because you mean to say there's no such a thing as soul. But there were people that said that, and there might still be people that say that. I mean, there definitely are some people that say that.
This is right. This is a priori assuming that you have a soul that needs to...
No, it's not. It's not. I explained to you it's not. Okay, I went through this at length.
Sorry,
it's not. It's not explaining that you have a soul. Soul is whatever, the word, when we say soul in the question, we just mean whatever it is that is the principle of a living body.
Living function.
Exactly. And maybe there's nothing, and that, in other words, living life is just what we call bodies that are organized a certain way, which is what any biologist would tell you more or less nowadays, right? So that's not even, you ask if there's such a theory. If you go to college, that's the theory they're going to teach you. In medical school, that's basically what they teach you.
Right. I teach that a vegetable is a dead person, it's no way.
That
a vegetable is a dead person.
Not only a vegetable, a living person is a dead person. No, why do you teach called a vegetable? Yeah. Well, philosophically and morally, we just make up, like, because of the incoherence of morality. But, of course, a person is just a dead person. Because there's no definition called life. If you go to, there's no such thing called life. Life is an illusion. Life is just a very complex machine. That's basically how you would put it, or boils down to whatever the parts of it is. And when it's a big machine, we call it life. Nobody really will answer you what life is. Not in the biology course, for sure not. And philosophy course, then you get people actually arguing about this. But in biology, they just assume that life is not life. Basically, that life doesn't exist. Remember that life gets defined away. That's reductionism. That means there's no such thing. Like, it's not only a vegetable. A vegetable, you get into like a weird case where the guy not doing anything, so maybe then is he alive? But even when he is doing something, he's not really doing anything, because just a bunch of just like your machine is not alive, right? There's no thing. There's nothing called life, right? There's nothing called life which is distinct from everything that it does. That's the basic, or everything that it's made out of, and the lower level, and so on. Anyways,
functional. It's purely functional. Right?
It's so many words. No, it's purely dead. It's dead. It's dead. Life is a fake thing. Life is not a real thing.
But it's referred to by certain functions that it performs, right?
No, functions are a very fancy word.
Okay, not functions.
No, it's not referred to anything. No, by a certain level of organization. That's the more precise way to say it.
We understand that what is organized and dead is the same as when it's organized.
You could say a certain complexity.
Organized and alive, right?
Yeah, because that just means less organized, or organized in a lesser way. Organized is, I'm using organized in a very nothing. There's nothing specific.
So what do we use as an identifier between living and not living?
No, it's the other way around. Living is just a word for that, because we assume
normal.
Originally, when you take off all the glasses that you have put on, people walk around in the forest. I'm going to start again from zero. I can do it every day. People walk around in the forest or in Athens, and they go looking around the world, and they see that there's two kinds of things in the world. It's very interesting. You have to if you want to be a philosopher, you have to go back to the guy in the forest, wearing his shirt, with his loincloth. And he's walking around, and there seem to be two very different kind of things. The things in the world behave in two very distinct different ways. In the most general thing, right? You learn Parshas Bereshis, this is the kind of image you're supposed to get. There's living things and non-living things.
Right.
Now, what this is, and then you start becoming a philosopher, saying what exactly defines the living things. But living things do all kinds of interesting things. And living things, we could even argue about, are trees living things or are plants living things? But at least let's talk about animals, are usually the paradigmatic case, because trees are more complicated, although they're technically, Aristotle was the one that came up and said, oh, well, plants are also alive. Before him, nobody really assumed that plants are alive. But at least that's how the story that he says, I don't know. We have to believe that. But if you take an animal, both humans and animals, right? Animal in the sense of whatever is shared between humans and animals, then there's something very interesting about animals that's not the same as rocks and possibly even trees. They do a lot of things. They seem to have, let's say, now you start arguing what exactly it is. There's a lot of things they do. Yeah, they act in certain ways. They are in certain ways. I don't know if doing is a good point. They are in certain ways which nothing else is. Like they. Okay, is that true? I think that's.
What about goal-oriented?
Well, yeah, we can. Maybe that's a good definition. Maybe that's a good definition, but that's a complicated definition because you can go and argue that say rocks also have goals. Okay, but that's one. Yeah, but those are things we could really argue. If you want to start really understanding it, you're gonna have to do what the first philosophers started doing and start, at least Plato and Aristotle started doing, which is let's now start telling me what exactly is it. Give me a good word. So they came up with basically this is where Aristotle, if you read through the list of theories that he has in the beginning of the Soul. He goes through. He says that basically people came up with 2 or 3 different principles, different definitions for what life is. So one person would say, well, you can get a lot of definitions if you really think about it. So what does it take animals, right? Forget about trees. What are the things that make? What does that mean to be alive? Right? You can come up with 1,000 different things. You can talk about movement. They move. One very general and obvious thing. We could talk about what was the other thing you talked about? They think. Which is something you might be thinking of when you say goal-oriented. They seem to act not only in simple ways and towards something greater, and so on. These are Aristotle thinks that these are the 2 main things that people notice. They think that's the word. Yeah, maybe. But I'm trying to show you. that walking around in the forest, there is something to be explained.
Right,
here.
yeah, and I was
Okay,
just
now,
pieces of activity.
so at some point people started talk. Now, if you talk about humans, they're even more interesting. Maybe animals are the same, but at least they're even more interesting, and they're very different than anything else. So now, when you start explaining things and you start figuring out, when science begins or when human thought begins, and people start realizing that, well, you can have the fake stories that they tell you in the history of science. Usually, once people thought it was just the gods doing everything, and then they figured out that it must have a cause. I don't know that story ever happened, but it does bring out the point, right? You need to start explaining these things, and then one of the most basic things to explain is the fact of life.
Right.
And now the word. Now you have to remember where we're up to in the story when we start talking about soul. The word that we call things that have life is soul. That's just the word that means that. Soul, if you want to do some archaeology and research and try to work out where it starts, but both in the Hebrew context and in the Greek context, originally the only thing that you could really say about the word soul is that it denotes whatever life is. In other words, whatever causes life, or whatever life is.
I wouldn't attribute it to a dead animal, right?
Right, exactly. So whatever the difference is, exactly. The word soul is just a good word that says the difference between living and dead things.
Right, yeah.
Either living the same thing when it's alive and dead, or the category of things which are alive and dead, and so on.
So this thing that we're talking about does not translate into neshama.
Right. Not what we call neshama is already assuming that there is a certain kind of thing that answers this question. But when I'm talking about soul here, or nefesh, which is the language that Kesdrem uses, but where he's thinking of a step before that. That's why it's coherent for him to say the statement that one theory of soul is that the soul doesn't exist. People get very confused about this, but this is very good teachable moment to show that because otherwise, this is really important, because otherwise you start, the reason I'm doing this is because otherwise you start thinking that the whole reason people think there's a soul is because it says in the Torah or something like that. And that's not true, because it's a very basic question that soul is here to answer.
Right.
And that question is what really we're calling soul here, not the answer. Now the answer is you can have a whole bunch of theories of what that is and how it works and so on. But that's really where we're getting at with this point. Okay, so now exactly. So, no, yeah, exactly. So now this is not sort of study. This is, again, you could read Plato to have these arguments already and others, where they had the argument about, could you say that soul is basically nothing, just the organization of the things that compose the living thing, or the ways and so on. And the big difference, for example, would be, and this is the context in the Phaedo and Plato's dialogue, is does it survive death, right? That's actually not the most, interestingly, it's only halfway of what Rav Sadagon is interested in, because he's really interested in Schar Vayinish, which is even the next step. Surviving death is, like I started off saying, like if you have a list of Ikra Das, the soul existing is not one of them. Even the soul surviving death is not one of them. People go around saying something, there's a Shuras HaNefesh, there's Mikra Das, I don't know. In the Rambam's list, it doesn't exist. It's not. It's of course implied by the Rambam's list. There's Schar Vayinish, it's implied. It's implied by it, but it's not one of the list. It's an assumption that you need to have. Maybe, I'm not clear. I actually don't think you need. But it happens to be true that he believes that way. You could have Schar Vayinish in Olam Hazeh, like the Chemish. You could. Technically you could. I'm just saying that you could. Yeah, why not? If all Schar Vayinish would be in this life, then we wouldn't need a soul. Maybe you sort of would, because you need continuity, identity, whatever. But
why does good things happen?
Okay. I'm just saying technically, and that could be. But it's still important that these are not religious principles. That was my previous class already, or 5 different ones. This is not what we need. What the Ikra Das need is for the Schar Vayinish. And theoretically, I'm just saying theoretically, it's true that there's reasons why we went into this way. But theoretically, it's not the same thing. And if you go around saying this, the existence of the soul is not, the Rambam put the existence of God in the Ikra Das, although it doesn't say in the Torah ever there is a God. He pretended that it says in Hashem Nekechot, of course, not what it means. But because he thought that it was important to have that as an Ikra, but he didn't think it was important to have the existence of the soul as an Ikra, or that the soul survives death, or so on. He didn't think that way. There's some things that it's true that it's tricky what I'm saying. Just like they asked the same question about Bechira. Bechira, the Rambam says explicitly in Hilchos Shiva that it's the Ikra of the Torah, but he doesn't count it in the thing, because it's really something one step below in order for Schar Vayinish to work, you need Bechira. Okay, but it's not in itself an Ikra. It's not something that you go around teaching kids, we believe such and such. For whatever reason. It's a good question why. But That's what? Yeah.
Is it Iker, but it's not Iker?
Exactly. Okay, another whole class from 5 years ago. There's a difference between logical ikrim and theological ikrim.
Right.
It's a logical ikr. It's a logical ikr. There was a video about this. I don't remember. Recently, there's a logical ikr, and the Rambam's ikrim are not entirely only logical ikrim. Some of them are. It's not important. That was another. I don't remember. Okay, could be. Anyways, yeah. Kitzur, let's go. We have to move. Okay, sure. Kitzur is so Rasag going first. So again, we have 3 different kinds of theories. One theory that's called uncreated. That's taken care of by the first Mama. Second theory is that soul doesn't exist, and therefore both basically will have a big. That leads to all these problems. And you can't have Sheres and Nefesh. You can't have Chavanish really, at least if you need the soul to survive death for that. And for that he gets away with by saying that that's sort of incoherent, for these 2 reasons. And he doesn't go. One thing that interesting again, different here than in the sugya of the existence of God and of Chiddush Olam, he doesn't get into the arguments very very deeply. He doesn't seem to very much care about them. He's just sort of like rehearsing the most general sense of them. He doesn't really get into it. And interestingly, again, the Rambam also doesn't get into it too much. The Rambam refers to theories of the soul, and he refers to the ethical implications of them, Shmona Prukim at length. He never really gets into the discussion, what is the soul and how it works, and Nevuchim or anywhere. He does do that for the existence of God and Chiddush Olam in the same way, but it doesn't really. They all seem to think that the question of what the soul is like a question for science. It's a very important question, like for philosophy, but not for theology, not for what they need. They all assume certain theories, but they don't really get into it to like try to prove it. I don't really know who does. I mean, there are later authors that do. There's like entire books, Toiras and Nefesh from Rabbi Nebachia, maybe ascribed to him, or someone else wrote it, but whatever. But then not these sources don't do it.
Detailed account of the nature. And
they don't get into the philosophy of it, like disproving different theories.
And I'm assuming borrows from Aristotle.
Yeah, he assumes the Aristotelian theory more or less, but he doesn't even give an account of how that matches with the Torah. Instead, like for existence of God, or like for God not being a body, he spends thousands and hundreds of pages trying to, both to prove it and to disprove other proofs and to disprove other theories and to try to make it match with the Torah. And for example, the Aristotelian theory of the soul is a big problem for simple meaning of Schav Einish, and the Rambam just assumes it to be true, and he sort of pushes it in, and he doesn't seem to doesn't address this problem head on. He never answers the question, for example, of is there a personal soul? Okay, I'm not getting into it, but I'm just saying he never really answers certain basic questions that arise from that shidduch that he made, and he seems to think that that's a very interesting question, like for science, for philosophy, but not for Ikra Das, not for Sodas HaTorah, what he calls. And that's a very interesting point to think about. But anyways, So we dealt with these two kind of theories. Then we have the third kind of theory, which can be separated into 2 different theories, and he doesn't do this separation. Entirely doesn't. There's not going to ignores it, although some of his sources that we know that he used to do that, which is assuming that the soul is not uncreated and also not an accident of the body. What is it? So now we could just have a list. Is it a fire? Is it a water? Is it an air? Is it basically all the elements like Aristotle?
It's
wait.
Created, but not an accident. Right?
Exactly. So it needs to be a substance, basically. I think. Rasag going. I'm up to page 2 in my summary, or what I've still paid. It's on page 1 actually.
Yeah.
It's in the underline says 7 shittas nemrel and nefesh atzma. Right. Number 1 was mikra, so we dealt with that and we did pirchis of that. And now we have to go to the next. And I didn't give it more order than he does, but giving it to you now. Now we can ask a question. So what is it, right? This thing that makes things alive, what is it? And we could sort of invent whatever we want. We could, like Aristotle says, we could go through the 4 elements and make each one of them.
What's done here?
Somewhat. He doesn't go through all of them. Aristotle says nobody says the soul is earth.
Right.
For some reason. Everyone thinks that it's somewhat better than that.
Well, fire
and he doesn't really have the water theory.
Ish and Ruch both have Aristotle's elevation principle, right?
Yeah, somewhat. There's reasons. Aristotle in his book tries to explain why people thought all these things.
So if he believes that the soul just would leave the body and fall on the floor.
Yeah, possibly. He doesn't seem to have any principle of movement. That's true. That's really why he says that in his theories. But he doesn't have water either here. He has air and different kinds of air,
He's the only one that has movement.
He does have blood, which is sort of a liquid.
Well, then the fire.
He does have blood, which is a liquid. Fire goes up, of course.
Yeah, it goes up.
Fire does a lot of things. Well, what you think of it, and what you learn at the science is one thing, but what they thought is another thing. Of course, it's even like psukim that say that the soul is fire. I mean, we even use this imagery. It's not even a weird thing to say, and obviously the soul gives some warmth to the body, because one of the big differences between living bodies and dead bodies is that dead bodies are cold. There does seem to be something important about fire.
It's funny that they would say ruach, because earth and fire are the two warmers, right?
Yeah, but again, earth no, I don't think earth is warm. And the problem with earth is, like you said, it doesn't seem to be inert. In any case, he has mostly these. He doesn't do this, but I'm just giving you this. You could have a list of whatever you want. Basically, you could have it be any of the elements. Why would it have to be a simple element? Even I don't even know. It could be something. It could be both. It could be made. It could be a compound. Nobody really has this theory here. For some reason, everyone wants the soul to be somewhat more simple than the body. But again, if you read Aristotle in like one of the first chapters on the soul, he gives like this list of previous theories, and he tries to explain. One of his things to do is explain why everyone else thought what they thought, and why, according to their own reasoning, his theory is better. He always does it. That's his smart thing of doing. But therefore, you can't trust his reasoning for everyone that he gives for everyone else. But in any case. But all these reasons are, like going back to the caveman people, it seems to be reasonable for someone to say, well, I think the soul is air. Like obviously people breathe when they're alive and they stop breathing when they're not alive. So it seems to be like some kind of wind or something like that makes people alive, or all animals basically. They even had a problem like fish. How are fish alive? Maybe they're not alive because they don't breathe, or maybe they breathe water. Like there was real discussions about these things.
Of how Sadia's mechanical soul would work, right?
Yeah.
Meaning air. It goes in and it makes the body.
Yeah. He doesn't think that it's air because he thinks that air is not good enough.
Well,
but yeah,
it's not exalted enough.
He gives weird. He doesn't say this exalted thing. I just made that up, by the way, just to be clear.
I liked it.
It's a good. I'm pretty sure that it's true. I tell things that are not true. But he just gives like random weird answers to all these little specific theories. He like goes through and says, well, it's not fire because fire has the attribute of being dry and hot, and it's not dry and hot. Like I don't know. Like how do you know? What does that even mean?
Why that's the case, right? Why that's not.
Yeah, it doesn't get into much detail. Like I told you, it's just it's not air because air is wet and the soul is not wet. Whatever. He seems to be trying to say when you read this like list, this like recital of opinions and why they're wrong. He seems to be saying that you're all making it too physical. Like, well, could you show me like how it's wet? Like could. Mashenket, for his theory, although it's a physical theory, doesn't have this problem because it's a kind of physical thing that doesn't get neat. It's not wet, or it's really basically it's not one of the elements. Another way of saying it. Yeah, that's why I was talking about exalted, right? It doesn't need, and so on. It doesn't need to eat. It doesn't. That's really seems to be underlying all this kind of specific objections. He quotes a theory that it's ear, maybe two ears. He quotes a theory that it is two parts. Part in the heart and part in the rest of the body, and he doesn't like any theory that has two souls because then how do they talk to each other? And the specific theory that he quotes was that one was eternal and one was created, and that doesn't make sense. That's not a good shidduch. So then he quotes another theory, which seems to be the Stoic theory, that there's two ears, so there's ear inside and then some ear outside, which comes and he says, well, no, that's not true, and well, the fact that you see that people breathe, that's not what makes them alive. So interesting old physical theory that people breathe just because they're hot and it's air conditioned. Right. You know that theory.
There's still a modern science version that uses this, that you want to cool your brain.
Right, that's it.
Okay,
so
maybe. Uh-huh. But they thought that breathing is not really important for life. It's just important so you shouldn't burn up because your heart is hot, and that's like a fan to make sure you don't burn up.
If you're asking a question about fish that they don't have ear, that means obviously ear is not oxygen. So that would be a good theory.
Well, they don't know about oxygen, these people.
I understand, but if you're not talking about oxygen, then yeah, ear could be just, besides for oxygen, let's say you have a different way of getting oxygen, then you don't need ear. You just would need air to cool down your body.
Right.
So
it's probably true. It's true that the body needs to be cooled down. It's not even false. It's just like, all of these things make sense. I always tell. Nobody was crazy. Again, if you go to school, they tell you, well, everyone before, modern science was crazy and we're the first smart people. No, it's just the opposite. I read someone saying, they're all rational, they were wrong. But if you go around saying, this is a very big difference between going around saying we're the first rational people and going around saying we're the first right people. Because when you say I'm right and he's wrong, you have to actually argue with him. When you start to think we're qualitative, we have like a totally different kind of, because we figured out rationality, we didn't discover rationality. Cause and effect is something that everyone learns when they're 2 years old about. Like, there's nothing new.
Intellectually, lazy.
No, they were not lazy either. They just were working with whatever.
Intellectually lazy, meaning to say that they don't.
Yeah, it's wrong. People often say like, well, we don't believe in magic because that's not rational. Well, what's not rational about believing in magic? It's just another theory of how things work. It might be wrong, but you can't just go around saying, well, those people in wherever that believe in magic, they're just nuts. They're not nuts. They just have a different way of it. Maybe they're wrong. They might not be taken into account.
More magical than Galileo.
I'm not even getting into
right?
that. No, I'm not getting into that even. Just saying the concept of saying this is wrong because it's not rational is not a rational concept. No, it's just it's just wrong because and therefore it's both makes things both better and worse. Just relative to a lot of discussions that we have in Lakewood. You know, when anything that says in any early source, none of them are crazy. I mean, some people are dumb. I'm not saying, but for the most part, the people that survive that we still read, we mostly assume. Yeah, we mostly assume that the ones that we're still reading are not crazy. They were not dumb. They're all working with the facts that they knew and with the information they were all rational. Now, they might still be wrong because they were missing some information or because they didn't think of some kasha or so on. But not crazy. So you can't laugh at him. You couldn't just say that he's wrong. That's why I say there's no issa to say that Chacham were wrong. There's issa to be malak al divrei Chacham. If you laugh at him, then you're crazy. Like you just that's just wrong, and also it causes you to miss a lot of good things that they say and so on. But they could still be wrong. That's different. People confuse this. Like if you respect him, then you say he's right. No, because I respect him, I say he's wrong. Right. If I would not respect him, I say, well, he has some kind of different way of thinking. No, he doesn't. It's the same, more or less the same way of thinking as you. He just didn't read the book that you read, or so on. Okay, this is back to where we are. So none of these theories are crazy. A lot of Sadigon probably seems to think that they're crazy, but actually he doesn't. He actually says after in Nas Gimel he says, well, let me finish. Then the sixth theory is important, not for what it is, but for the biblical point of it. Then he quotes Onan, which was the Kirui guy, saying that the soul is blood. But there's also a pasuk that says the soul is ear, nishmas chaim. But he doesn't quote that pasuk for some reason. But he's worried about this Karui guy that says that the soul is blood.
Well, it is different.
So I actually did look it up. We did look it up right last one because I thought that he's mad because the Karuim guy doesn't believe in the soul existing after death. But that seems to be not true. The Karuim, at least the one that I have, does definitely believe in even in Tchias HaMa'asim. Unlike the
Quran?
I don't know. I have a book of like Ikra Das Karui, and he says that. Yeah, they were cholik Chazal, but Chazal talk about people that were cholik on Tchias HaMa'asim, which is the Tzedekим,
right.
But which we know, according to Josephus, also didn't believe in Tchias HaMa'asim. But the Keroim, which are later, not the same thing, although the Rambam tries to conflate them sometimes, they're totally not the same group of people.
They didn't consider themselves to be the
no, they didn't even.
No, right?
No, not at all.
So
this connection was made by the Rambam.
Yeah, right, but they had
maybe some other people.
About style.
Okay, right? Whatever it is, I'm not getting into it. What's true is for sure that they denied the authority of the Chachamim, and they were invented by this guy Onan, and like in the Kifsa guy in them, like 9th century, 8th century, I don't remember, something like that, and this Onan guy wrote a book, and I thought that he's quoting it because that guy didn't believe in Tchias HaMa'asim, but he did. He just thinks that he's wrong in this pshat in the pasuk. And he said that the soul is blood because it says a pasuk, Ki Adam Hi Nefesh, literal pasuk. So Shain and the Sadigon said that this is wrong, and you don't know how to read. He doesn't say that this Opi pshat is true. He says because in the elaborates on it later in another page over here that a lot of times when things are called one thing, it doesn't mean that that's what it is. It means that that's where it is. So Dam Hi Nefesh means that the nefesh is in the dam. And like the next pasuk actually says, bad dam. So stira, really it's true, it's bad dam. What does it mean that it's bad dam? It's in the whole body really. It's not especially in the blood either, but it's another discussion. But it's in the blood also, and therefore, and sometimes we call things and after where they are. Like
it's not quite a rebuttal. It's just
it's a rebuttal in pshat. You know, it doesn't seem to say why it can't be. I think. Or you could think that what he thinks is that Onan again thinks that that soul is an accident because it's like an accident of the blood. I think he does quote some like saying Mikra Badam or something like that in one of the places. And that might be why he really thinks that it's wrong. But he mostly thinks that it's wrong in the pshat because he thinks that that's just not the correct reading of the pasuk. The pasuk doesn't say that the soul is blood. I think also because then you would have to start looking for the blood to where does it go when you die and come back with the Tchias HaMa'asim. That's really the way he thinks, and that seems to be weird to like. Some piece of blood come, where is it going? I think that's also why he thinks that it's not a reasonable theory. And again, it's too physical or too low-level physical for him. But he also needs to again, everything here is way too short for us to really know what's going on. So I'm making up a lot of details to sort of make sense. But it does think that Onan, and then later he quotes at more length something about, let me see, I have it here, about another Karui. So there was another Kurd that he quotes later, very interestingly, that said they asked this question. So this was Onan, which was the founder of Kiroism. Then there was another guy, Benjamin HaKiroi, whoever that was, and he wrote a book saying that the only thing that survives death is the bones. And he has psukim for that. A very nice psukim. It says, in other words, your sins stay. Where do they stay? In your bones. And it also makes a lot of sense because all the psukim of Tchesamais talk about the bones. Right. Haskell talks about the bones. And not only that, a lot of psukim and Atzmis Yosef and so on. Atzmis Yehid, there's more psukim that talk about dead people as being bones. So it does seem to be that that's what stays. That's the part that stays alive. And Sadigon says that for the same reason that this is all wrong. And I think actually over here, Sadigon is wrong in the pshat of the pasuk that he quotes.
It wouldn't be that much better than blood. I mean,
it's not better. It's
it has more.
It's better because it does last longer.
Lasts a little longer.
It's true. Maybe not even long, a little longer, a lot longer.
A lot longer, but it's only not the time longer. It's not.
No, bones can last forever. I mean, not so long. It lasts. We have bones from the time from Moshe Rabbeinu's time.
Blood not staying there. Bones also sometimes at least don't.
Sometimes it's okay, but that's not a real problem. I actually think that the bones theory is a good theory.
Yeah.
I actually think, unlike the blood theory, the bones theory is a good theory. This guy didn't actually say the soul is the bones. That's weird. He said that the soul is that's what's left. Maybe it's the same thing.
The soul is what's left in
he
the
said
bones.
Actually the way he quotes it is the context he quotes it is the question what's punished, the body, the soul. He says Benjamin said the bones are punished, but probably what Benjamin meant to say was that the soul is the bones. The psukim seem to follow this, and it seems to be a better theory. Yeah, there is a lot of talk. I don't know what you're talking about, the bones being a fire. It says like a pasuk eish ba'atzmaisa, but that's a metaphor. I don't know where does it talk about that?
I don't know. I thought.
Actually, bones last long enough for Tchesamais. A few thousand years is long enough. I mean,
someone dies, right?
Okay, so that maybe whoever dies in Auschwitz doesn't get Tchesamais.
No,
whatever. That was a kasha of someone already. I forgot who.
Why did the people that they got burned wouldn't?
No, it's said on I forgot where in the sefer about tefillah, about Chis Mason, about in what's it called? Not the giver.
That. No.
The Chis Masons, even if someone was they're scattered. And
that says weird. Maybe so we can disagree with. But if we're Keruim already, we definitely could disagree with that. Whoever, I don't know where that is from. If you read the Cheskel, which is one of the big sources for Tchesamais, definitely talks about bones. And even if the Gemara seems, this is okay. Tchesamais is a problematic thing. Of course, if the soul is the primary thing, then it's okay. But as long as you do need the same body to exist, then you would want the bones to stay. And there's the story of the Etzem Liz that stays. I don't know where that is from. Some medrash. I don't know where it's from. The Etzem Liz that only on Lava Malka, and there's some bone that stays. I was even told that if you go to the crematorium, you could find it. I don't know. I never checked, so I have no idea if it's true.
Right, the last resort was saying that it's indestructible, right?
Yeah.
This bone cannot be destroyed.
Yeah, the medrash says this, like someone actually tried and it didn't work. So that seems to assume something like this. Not literally that's the soul, but that's what the part that stays seems to be true. I mean, it seems to work. It actually seems to work. And he actually quotes, this person quoted a few psukim, like Atzmas Yosef, and he says, well, and if Sadigon, that's actually a good question, but I think that if Sadigon is wrong in the pshat of those psukim, because he says, well, and if Sadigon, and let me get back to where I am. Sadigon tries, basically his pshat argument is that the same kind of argument, that the pasuk sometimes call something after a specific part, but doesn't mean to say unlike other parts. Like when you say V'ikach Moshe Atzmas Yosef, doesn't mean he took only his bones. It was actually an entire body, but it was called that way for whatever reason. And he does give a very cute, nice example for this, which is true. He says speech is done by 5 parts. All of these parts take part in speech. And if you're psukim, you can see sometimes people say whatever the basic meaning of is I will speak. Sometimes it says pi, sometimes it says sometimes it says sometimes it says el chikech shayfa, which not exactly talking about speech, talking about longer shayfa. But anyways, the chaych, there's another pasuk that talks about the chaych speak. I don't know. Koil, yeah. That's talking about the throat. So basically, we could have all these different parts, and of course, every speech is going to have all of them. So when it says and it's not saying, well, speak with your throat and not with your tongue. It's just trying to say, for whatever reason, there's probably a specific reason why. Yeah, I'm sure it does have a different connotation. That's why he seems to be a little bit making things simpler for himself. But it is true what he's saying, that the language has a tendency to pick out a concrete part of something and talk about it in that way. But that doesn't mean that that's the definition of it. In Atzmas Yosef, for example, there's actually a medrash that talks about Atzmas Yosef and so on. Yosef HaTzadik was actually a mummy and definitely had bones. But then he talks about Shul, it says that they burned them, And it says that then they burnt. It says the pasuk Anshe Gilad burnt Shaul and his children, and then they buried their bones. And Avsadigon is not happy with any part of this story because he doesn't think it's correct to burn people. So therefore, he has to claim that they actually didn't burn them at all. So this person said, "Do you see that they buried only their bones, and the rest of their body was burnt?" That's actually true. That's a pshat of the pasuk. Sorry to say, Avsadigon, the career was right, but Avsadigon says no, they burned for them, like Seif from Allah Malach, and they made a laglema fire around them. It doesn't mean that they actually burnt them. And when it says they buried their bones, it actually means they buried their body. Just that, well, dead bodies are called bones sometimes. That actually makes sense.
That's what you're saying.
Like Atmas Yosef, it's because he's dead. Usually from dead people, the bones are what remains, so we call it like by bones. That's really what he. But then it sort of ruins his thought. That I don't know. There's something problematic with this pshat, but it is true. The general principle that he makes is true. And he does, and by the Dam he says another thing. Sometimes they talk about the heart. We say my heart feels. Well, my heart doesn't feel anything. It's the wisdom or the soul that's in my heart. So, but we call it al shem ekoyim. That's how he's doicha this theory of Dami and Nefesh. I'm not sure that that's also even that. Probably the pshat is closer to what the Karoi said, but I don't know. Generally, the Karoi know pshat, right? That's their business to know pshat. So we can. Anyways, but for philosophy, it's probably true that the soul is not a blood. So in that sense, it's true. Anyways, so those are the theories that he's not happy with. Now, again, all the theories that he quotes, the third group of theories are all physical theories. They all have the soul being some kind of physical thing. And he's not happy with the specific physical things that they are, right? Now, if you skip to Siman Beis, Os Gimel, here we already discussed this part. He says, well, the reason I brought all of this was because I want to show you that this is a complicated subject. Did we discuss this? Okay. Yeah. Whatever. And he brings a pasuk in Keheles. I'm going to skip that part. Now we have to go to Siman Gimel. There's a second page. Just the second page. It says Siman Gimel Dalet. Amisbare b'nyan nefesh. That's his language. And he says, so let me tell you my theory. So the first two parts of the theory already know. It's created. He has a pasuk. Okay. Or it's another pasuk. Hashem asher osel lani as a nefesh hazois. Interesting pasuk. But it says that the soul was created. And it was created what time? At the time of the creation of the body. We discussed this maybe already. Not earlier, so he doesn't believe that all souls are Sheshes and Bereshis and so on, unlike the Ramban. And others.
First it created the body, and then it says that
right, it's the Seder of Adam Adishon, and he thinks that Seder is every child that's born, when at birth the soul is created.
Oh, so it is the body first and then the soul.
Yeah, first body, then soul, every single person, and that soul is created Yesh Ma'ayin at that point. Very interesting. He doesn't have a problem with Yesh Ma'ayin happening. The Ramban explicitly Yesh Ma'ayin from nothing. In other words, it's
ex nihilo.
Yeah. The Ramban explicitly quotes this and says this is wrong. Well, it doesn't quote Avsadigon, but it quotes people that say this is wrong because the only time that things were created from nothing was in Sheshes and Bereshis, and from then on everything is created from something else according to the natural order more or less, unless it's a nest. And obviously every person being born is not a nest, so that doesn't really make sense. So therefore, all souls must have been created at the creation of the world. And like Chazal sometimes talk about the neshamas of tzaddikim being in heaven before they come down, and some of tzaddikim, it doesn't make sense to talk about the neshama being in heaven before it comes down. Like all these midrashim that talk about mashbiyin lois, all these kind of things don't really make sense for him because there was no soul.
It was never connected to the body, so I think it could make sense.
No, there's no. He doesn't think that. You could say that he doesn't think that. You could have said that. That's the other theory. You would say that he, for some reason, thinks that. Why does he think? Does he has a dik and the pasuk? Why does he actually think it? I think.
That's a bekirba, right?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Now that you say it, yeah, he has the bekirba, and like you said, you could see that from the
it's when the soul is connected to the life, but it could be a soul.
If it's like also soul.
Yeah, there could be soul. There could be for what he thinks a soul is. This is really weird. For what he thinks soul is, there definitely can be souls without bodies. Although they can't really do anything, they're sort of useless. I think this has to do with this. So again, his theories are not sophisticated enough to cover everything. But what I think, and again this I'm making up, but everyone else that talks about him is making stuff up also, so I might as well. What I think is going on is something like this. He very much wants the soul to be connected in a very serious way to the body. He's not happy with separate souls. He doesn't have really a separate soul. Although his soul can be separate from the body, it's sort of similar to like my hand can be separate from my body, but it can't really do anything. He says, and that's the part that I wanted to learn today. But he very, very clearly has in other words, I asked this question. Did I do this? If you ask the question what a person is, right? Different question, still not doing what we asked earlier. His answer is going to be a soul and a body. Unlike if you ask Plato, or maybe if you ask the Rambam, he's going to tell you a person. If you ask the Zohar explicitly, the person is a soul, not a body. body is an accident of it's the opposite, total opposite of the earlier theory. Body is an accident of the soul, sort of. But the person, it's even in jail in the soul, like Plato said, and so on. That's not what Rav Tzaddik would never agree with that, and he explicitly denies this. Again, not in so many words, but he definitely believes that Adam, Masha Nikra Adam, is a body with a soul, or a soul and a body, both together. And that, therefore, he would probably be very uncomfortable for him to have souls hanging out in heaven for 1,000 years before they're born and doing nothing. They do hang out after they die, but that's actually sort of a bad thing. So it's actually very shvachamas, is this hanging out after you die. It's not bad, but it's like inert. It doesn't do anything. Gan Eden, it's a freezer.
I don't know why.
For him, his basic theory.
Before, but okay.
What? You could. Technically, you could. I told you. Technically, you could. Technically, you could. Technically, you could, but it makes no sense. He doesn't care, but he's Yashmain. He doesn't have this theory. He doesn't seem to have a problem with Yashmain in the principle.
Dry good or whatever.
Yeah, he doesn't have a base. In principle, he doesn't have the Ramban's, which is sort of the Rambam.
Right.
Why the Ramban has this problem is a good question. But he doesn't have this principle that Yashmain can't happen. He thinks that it could definitely happen. And he maybe thinks even, this is complicated, because again, there's had to go on, all his philosophy is somewhat melikut from different philosophies, and he doesn't even consistently adhere to the philosophy that is usually said to adhere to, which is the Metuzalite Kalam. And the Rambam tries to pretend that he does, and then attacks him for that. And the Rambam sort of says,
or for being an orthodox Metuzalite columnist.
Yeah. The Rambam almost explicitly quotes him in Shemona Perukim and says some people who have caught the virus of Kalam say things, and he means Rav Tzaddik. It doesn't say the word virus, it says choili, but I'm just translating it in English for it to make sense. And then also in Mishnah Torah, he never quotes Rav Tzaddik by name, only the Shvach never quotes him to criticize him, but he definitely refers to arguments that is made by him, and basically the whole part of Nevuchim that it's attacking Kalam is attacking Rav Tzaddik. But what he does over there, and just I'm keep on doing these digressions, but what he does over there is that he tells you this is the Kalam theory. The Rambam does this very weird thing where he gives you his opponent's theory and better than they did themselves. And some columns actually read the Moreh Nevuchim to get the column, because the Rambam is a very good summarizer of. Yeah, he's a very good encyclopedia. That was his big thing often. He's a very good summarizer of things. Similar thing happened to Al Ghazali. Anyways, right. But the point, very interesting point is, and the Rambam says, if you don't, and he says explicitly, these are the 12. I remember he has a list of 12. I think 12 or 14 principles of kalam. He says none of these work without the other. If you want to be a kalamist, you must believe all of these things, and if you don't, you're just confused. And Rav Tzaddik is explicitly one person that believes in some of those principles and not others. So, and which means that you can't really criticize him even, because you're never easily going to jump to something else and the Rambam, in order to criticize, says you can't have any of your assumptions, any of your basic principles without any of the other ones, and therefore anyone that says otherwise just is confused by himself. He doesn't understand himself, his own theory. And that's actually something that happens historically in the history of thought. That's something that often happens, but it sort of happened to Rav Tzaddik for sure also, because Rav Tzaddik, for example, the big example that I know is Rav Tzaddik, and the Rambam explicitly quotes the Kalam theory of the soul, which sounds especially similar to we'll get to Rav Tzaddik theory, and he says this makes no sense. But the reason that makes no sense is because for him, that only works with a certain kind of atomism, and he says it doesn't work. And Rav Tzaddik is definitely not an atomist; he explicitly denies atomism. So he's one of those people that it's very hard to pin down. We can't really put him in any of these boxes. That's why the best theory of Rav Tzaddik would be to say that he's more of a theologian than a philosopher, meaning to say he's interested in the religious meaning of these things more than he's interested in having some sort of consistent philosophy. And that's why I have permission for saying all the kind of things which I say, which is that he has a religious reason for not liking the soul hanging out for no reason. Although technically, if you ask me, yeah, it's true that it's true that. Right? Yeah, of course he does, but he's not a good enough philosopher.
To get there.
Sorry, I don't know.
It's not his goal.
It's explicitly not his goal. Although he would want to do that, but it takes time, And he says, he says explicitly over here, I'm doing it. Even the Akdama of this whole book, and in this shot again. Even more so for this shot, he says, I'm not going to be precise, I'm just going to give you an overview. So it's possible if you were to ask him and push him to the wall, he would answer you, I don't know.
Or subscribe to some system.
Yeah, but he seems to not care so much about that. So back to where I was, that's why I was saying, it's true that technically there's nothing stopping him from having the soul pre-exist the body. But there is something like b'derech nisr, or b'derech, I don't know how you want to say, there's something that feels wrong in his way of thinking, because for him, a soul and a body are a unit. And you can't. That's why, for example, he's very against Gilgulim at the end of this shot. And again, he gives reasons, specific reasons why. But the main reason is because he's very anti-Plato. Yeah, he thinks it's nonsense, never happened, never will be. And one of, again, if you think in this way, the basic insight behind Gilgulim is antithetical to his way of thinking about the soul. Because the general instinct of a Gilgul is Plato. Basically, that the soul is totally separate from the body. That's what Plato, there was Gilgulim before Plato and after him, but he's one of the big sources for it. And because the soul is something totally different from the body, and therefore totally can be one soul in a different body, maybe it's worse or better, and so on, but it's very, very separate. It's very separate from the body. And there's nothing wrong with it going, actually reasonable if you think that way, right? There's like some economical theory for why Gilgulim would be true if you think that. Because why would God make a whole bunch of them if we can reuse the same, right? Yeah, it's like recycling. Okay, no, I'm just saying that's a joke. Halfway is a joke. But there's other reasons. There's reasons, religious reasons why to believe in Gilgul. But anyways, but the reason why it bothers him is then this ruins the unity of the soul and the body, because this ruins people. In other words, then I'm not me, and that he claims that for Schai V'Onish, therefore it doesn't even solve the problem it purports to solve, which is the problem of Schai V'Onish. Whatever it is, that's very important for him. For this person, in other words, what you see is what you get. He's very what you see and what you get kind of person, although he does believe in reason, but he doesn't believe in he doesn't believe in reason that denies reality, right. Unlike the Rebbe Rambam ascribes to Kalam again. But he also doesn't believe in very abstract things that are totally, at least from the created world, God is like that. But everything else is sort of going to be within some limit of common sense. And a person is me. I'm a person. You're a person. You're a person. Not my soul is me, and therefore yesterday I was someone else. That doesn't make sense to him. And the same way, if me existed 5,000 years before I was born, that's also very weird. But me being created when I was born, that makes sense. Now the fact that I go on to live, that also makes sense. Okay, so I go on, I could resurrect, I got Chesed Ma'asim and so on. But all these things make sense within this kind of framework. And he's right, and what I keep on saying is that he is very right in this. In other words, if you read the Chemesh and if you read Chazal, that is the picture of the human you get. You don't get this kind of pictures of human being not what you see.
So would he believe that the soul is also part of the resurrection, meaning it's the soul and the body resurrection?
Yeah, of course. The resurrection is just, the way his definition is, that they're just separated and put back together. Reunited. That's what Chesed Ma'asim is. Thus, this soul with this body, this shidduch coming back.
But they're both considered dead, right? Or not existing.
Yeah, they're both separate. No, they're both separate. They're both.
I'm sorry, I can't be non-existent because
they're both separate. They're both probably. I don't have to look into Chesed Ma'asim what he says about your question about what happens if the body disappears. He does ask this question. I'm pretty sure that he asked this question, but I don't remember.
The thing is that the bones exists. It's just inert.
Yeah. That would be the classic case of Chesed Ma'asim. I'm pretty sure he does have the question. He does have the question. Yeah, he asks in Mamash V'Asai, he asked this question: what happens if the person disappears? And he says that that's impossible because of the conservation of matter. So you're going to be somewhere. You might not be in your grave, but it's not. Yeah, it's somewhere. Wherever it is, the basic elements of it are going to still exist, and you're going to find it from wherever. That's his answer. What's known as the conservation of matter nowadays.
Yeah.
But he believes, and it doesn't have to be in the same form, whatever, it doesn't matter to him.
We conform to anything else.
Yeah, it's sort of everything could be right. So you could take this too far. But that's just, again, for him, it's just to answer this problem of you become nothing. He says, well, nothing ever becomes nothing, and therefore that's not a real problem. Of course, the classic case would still be that these bones, that's why it's easier to talk about it that way. But technically, the bone is somewhere. So what's probably someone ate it, that's someone's soup, who cares? Okay, then you get into a problem because maybe someone else's body. Okay, I don't know. but again, he's not going that far. But in any case, that's his answer.
If the bones is the body, then it doesn't really matter because
whatever parts make up this body, whatever connection of these parts, that's the parts that are going to come back together. God's going to take this piece, maybe the whole thing or part of it. I don't know if he needs all parts. You can get into these technical details if you want.
One bone that doesn't.
Maybe there's one bone that's more important. Right? You could think of. I don't know. He does.
Clearly, he doesn't believe that you're getting your fingernails back, right? There are parts of the body that are more.
They said bone.
He doesn't say the word bones here. He doesn't say the word bones. I was saying and then if we look in Zion, he says this. He says God can find the little pieces. That's not in here. It's in the next mama that I didn't bring here. But he asked this question about Chesed Ma'asim, and he says, yeah, God can find the pieces from wherever they are. But the point being is not yesh me'ayin again. That's then because you need to be that person. So whatever it is, we can ask the question: what's the minimum piece of bone or piece of matter that constitutes this person's body? I don't know. Maybe there's a minimum. I don't know. But then I don't know. But that's like a level of sophistication that he doesn't get to. It doesn't ask that level of question.
Okay, I shouldn't push this further, but it has to be there. But there's a minimum that has to. If this conservation of matter and everything still exists, then why should it be a minimum?
Yeah, maybe not. I don't know. I'm just saying that. I'm just trying to get to the principle of it. Is this person, this body, and this soul? They're the ones that are going to get Chai V'Anish, and they're the ones that are going to be in Ches Meisel, because that's where Chai V'Anish happens. Nothing else. And therefore, it's not before and not after. That's very important for him, for the person to be this person. And, that's why, I'm not getting into more thoughts about this, but that's the basic. That's the basic. And that's the basic, if you think of probably that's what makes the most sense, or at least the closest to what the Pusik seems to think, what the Bible seems to think. It's probably the closest to what Chazal seem to think in general. Chazal definitely don't believe in a separate soul in the sense of Plato, at least unless you include the Zohar. But Chazal Nigla don't never talk about the person in that way. For them, a person is very much, again, they're not philosophers, so then you don't need to put them into some coherent system. But for them, in this way, a person is a person. We can't separate that into a body and a soul in a very real way, and so on. And
right.
Okay, now, so now he needs to tell you what actually a soul is. That's where I'm up to, the third page. Yeah, you have a question?
No, I was just...
So now he has a question, and this page is his theory of what the soul actually is. I want to get to Siman Daled also, because that's where I get to the religious point. But this is his theory, and this is what he says. So what is the soul actually? I'll tell you. It's a thing, a substance, as transparent as the spheres, Kebiris HaGalgalim, and even more than them. So it says it's at least
more transparent than the Galgalim.
Yeah, it's exactly. In other words, no, it's two things. It's both transparent as the spheres, because I just tried to describe this in my Yiddish class yesterday. But one of the big ancient theories was that the Galgalim have to be transparent, because otherwise, firstly, because you don't see them, they have to be a thing, right? Remember what the spheres are? You have to go back to the caveman. No, don't do whatever, because you end up with weird intuitions about crazy people. We have to go back to the caveman person. I don't know why I'm going to do this in like 3 minutes. We have to go back to we have to go back to the caveman person. There is a very interesting thing. We already figured out life on this world. That's a very amazing thing, but it's caused by souls. Okay, whatever that is. Now we look up to the sky, and there's something even more amazing. So amazing that most ancient people thought that these were gods. I mean, that's how amazing they must be. And the sky and the heavenly bodies, what's known as the heavenly bodies, the things in the sky, so basically the sun, the moon, and the moving planets and the not moving stars, as they were called, they do something really interesting, which is, well, firstly, two things I'll talk about here. He talks about only one, but we could talk about two. They're light. They create light. And they let themselves be seen. And this is amazing, because everything we know, more or less, or the most dominant sense for humans at least, is sight. And that's all caused by the sun and the stars. This seems to be very important. Okay. Now, second thing is that they seem to be very consistent. More consistent than anything else, because even life on this world, everything dies, everything changes. Even this ocean is sometimes not ocean, and sometimes there's a flood, and the earth becomes sea, and the sea becomes earth, and things like that. Nothing is stable in this world. Under the moon, like Aristotle said, nothing is stable. If you're looking for stability, stability is a very conservative thing. Not on this world, not under the moon. You need to go somewhere else. The heavenly world seems to be extremely stable, at least on human scale, right? Maybe in even the Greeks had this. Maybe in 70,000 years it changes. Okay, but on human scale at least it's extremely stable, and maybe even eternal. But it's definitely extremely stable and extremely how do we say? It's disciplined, right? They never make mistakes, right? People make mistakes. Even nature makes mistakes. Very important. This is not something that Darwin figured out. Everyone knew that nature makes mistakes. In general, cats only give birth to cats, but sometimes they give birth to weird things that are not cats, whatever they are. Deformities happen. So nature makes mistakes. Nature does not actually follow a law. That's why law of nature is not an ancient term. Because it's only in the moderns that start thinking the nature follow laws, and therefore for that to work, they need to abstract the laws extreme. No, that's why they need to. Just I'm telling this to you. Therefore, what modern terms knows as laws of nature need to be very abstract and totally useless, because they need to be mathematical, so abstract that they could be internal. But then that means that they're not going to predict anything real, because anything real is you're going to get into the world where there's mistakes.
Someone once tried to use Meifakak, the word of function, and he was asking this. I think it was Chomsky. He said, "Okay, what's the function of a skeleton? Is it to store calcium or to stop me from falling into a puddle?"
No.
I thought so.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not talking about functions. Talking about in any case, back to where I am. Yeah. But so this world is a lawless world. You have to remember, even nature is lawless. It's on the like what someone said, that it has minhagim and not halachas. It's sort of most of the time does the same thing, but not always. Okay. Oh, that was Francis. I think Francis Bacon said that. But anyways, yeah, because he only believes in minhagim. Wait, that's another level. Anyways, he uses like the guy that says everything is just a minik. There's no halachas. Anyways, okay. The Kesdrem. So therefore, if you want stability, you look up, and it's amazing the stability that they have. Every single day, it comes up from here, and of course, it takes time to figure out what the stability is, because it does seem to change, throughout the year and so on. But after a few years, you figure out that this is all on schedule. It's not like what the magician thought, the day is becoming shorter and he's going to die, the world is going to... No, there's a schedule, and even greater things, like even eclipses, which for a long time were thought to be magic, they're not. They're actually on schedule. So this is amazing. And therefore, now the big thing is this has to be who is pushing it, right? Who is schlepping the sun across the sky every day? So of course there's no horse with four, chariot with four horses called the god Ra schlepping it or something. That's nonsense. I don't even know if the people that told these stories believe that that's what was doing it. So what is it? So there must be something pushing it. So Hadulich Sif sphere. Okay, Hadulich Sif Galgal. Galgal is whatever it is that moves, and of course.
Then you have the same question that you have by soul, right?
And of course, wait. Yeah, basically, but of course, now of course, we never saw anything moving without something pushing it directly. So therefore, it needs to be pushed and not pulled. Very important. That's why Newton came up with the idea that it doesn't have to be pushed, or at least that we could describe it without that.
Newton
in any case,
he wasn't happy with
yeah. But in any case, they figured out this idea of action at a distance and so on. But the kids said, and for the olden days, everyone thought, and therefore there must be something that, in other words, the star, not like we have a very different world than them, because we think that the sun is just hanging in the sky. They thought that the sun is sitting on something.
Magic,
and actually the sun is not working. What?
We have a magic, gravity.
Yeah, we have magic, exactly. We believe in magic. They were rational. We're magicians. 100%. No, modern science believes in magic. Yeah, it's true. We believe in magic. Something called gravity that nobody ever saw, nobody knows what it is. We just believe that it exists and it causes things to move. But in the olden times, people were rational. Nothing moves without anything moving it. And therefore, this is absolutely true. And therefore, but that's why. Okay, wait. I'm just telling you. I have to let them stay. Story. And therefore, there must be, the sun is not actually moving, it's sitting on something that's moving, basically. Now that's Atkan, that's basically everyone believed in this. Almost everyone, some people were skeptical about it, but almost everyone believed in this. Now we got into another problem. This thing we never saw. Nobody ever saw it. So must the pshat. And not only that, if it would see it, it would be a problem, because then we wouldn't see the sun, So Kamash Malon, that it's transparent, and now not sound transparent. Transparency doesn't mean what we think. That it means something deeper, but I don't know exactly what. But basically, it's amazing because it's transparent. In other words, that's one way of showing that it's not really matter in our sense. Because nothing in this world is transparent. Well, some things are somewhat transparent, like water and glass and so on, but not as transparent as the.
Well, I don't understand that Sadly saying that the soul is more transparent than.
Yeah, well, I'm going to get to it. One second. Not more transparent. It has light. It has its own light. That's what I was trying to say. Now, so transparency. What they call transparency, actually the word Zohar was created to translate this word. If you look in, not created, it's a pusik, but so the rakia means the galgal, and that is doesn't shine, it doesn't have its own light. So what does it mean, Zohar rakia? Zohar rakia is the transparency, it's actually something deeper than light, because it's the ability to receive light. So that's what transparency is defined as. The ability to conduct light. No, it doesn't create light. The sun creates light. But what the sky does, or what the galgal does, is it allows us to receive the light, or it allows itself to receive the light. Unlike everything else, like earthly things that are dark, right? In a very real way. This world is a god. What?
The galgal is not what propels the sun to motion.
It does two things. That's what I'm saying. It does two things. It's both the cause of the sun's motion, and it's also
to receive its light.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Well, everything else, ear also must have some kind of transparency because of
quality.
Exactly, it has some kind of conductive quality. That's a quality of the galgal itself relative to the sun, where it receives light, and that's what we call transparency. I just made up this word. I don't even know that they use this word. I do know that they use the word that I told you when they read this pasuk, which Sadi was talking about. He said that there is really like bohir. They do the whistle bohir. It says the word bohir bashchokim. That's why there's two kabbalas for them, bohir and zohar, and they're named after the spheres, because spheres are literally came from spheres. Rabban Shalom, you will have to think a little bit.
Right.
That's where we got the word, and therefore the zohar is the world of spheres. Well, they thought of the spheres in a different way. Maybe it's a mushal, but in any case, that's where they got the world from. Yeah, but that's where they got the word from, according to me. Now, again, I'm making stuff up, so you don't have to believe me.
Comes from sphere? I think it's
Spheres comes from sphere is only halfway true, because it might come from number. So there's two real etymologies that are at least have an equal claim to be true. Because the Sefer Yetzirah, it comes from Sefer Yetzirah, and Sefer Yetzirah probably not means spheres, it probably means numbers.
Okay.
Not probably, almost definitely. So in that sense, it does not come from spheres. But it does seem the Sefer HaBoim might mean spheres and so on. But I say this just for fun. Anyway, so the Zohar is not really the book of light. You have to remember. Unlike this person, I don't know how they translate it. The book of, doesn't even say. Book of radiance they translate it sometimes, or the book of splendor. But it's really the book of transparency. Much better translation, if you ask me. Much more interesting, because it's what allows you to understand, to receive light, not what. Yeah, it's what allows you to receive light. It's not what shines. It's a very big, different kind of thing. And also, if you think about the spheres in this way, okay, shine enough. Where did I go? Shine. So this is the rakia. This is the galgal. It has these two things. It causes the sun to move, and it also has transparency, or also is conductor of light. Well, the ear is also, like I said, but the galgal is even better than that. So it's probably in different ways.
So now we're until the moon.
Until us, yeah. At least, all the line. Well, up to where you get the ear, up to you get to the what we call the atmosphere. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, in some sense, they would think that we are living in the galgal of the Yerech. Sometimes the people would think that because of another problem, which is otherwise what's holding it up. Right, so all the ear, or whatever we are living in, is some way part of a galgal also. Because otherwise, how is it standing? There's obviously no Amidah Shemaim, right? There's no pillars holding up the moon. So what's holding it up? So therefore, we have to assume that the world is really full. Of course, but that's metaphysically or metaphorically. But in Gashmias, we must assume that this world is full. This was a real problem. But anyways, that's where the ear is somewhat part of that in some sense. The sky and so on. Okay. There, now, but this is all a mush. Some halfway is a mushal for him. That's why it's very hard to figure out when the mushal for him stops and when the nimshal starts. And there's no nimshal there according to me, but according to other people there is. But he says, therefore, that the soul must be at least is able to receive light, so it's conductor of light and transparent as the galgal, but has something even more than the galgal because it can think. It has intellect, and the galgal, according to him, does not have intellect, unlike according to the Rambam, where it does. Yes, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And well, that's what it says here at least. Absolutely not. Yeah, it actually says, he's the machloek between Sadigon and the Rambam is what the Shemaim Mesaprim Kved El means. The Rambam says it's literal, very weirdly, and the Sadigon says no. I think he even quotes him quotes him without his name, and when he talks about that, he says no. It just means when you see the sky, you understand, or in like a metaphor, how's it called? Not metaphorical, in like a abstract sense. No, and. Hashmaim is happening not literal, right? It's a figure of speech. It's a kind of figurative way, right? It doesn't speak. It tells us, like it tells you. Not I have to tell you. I don't have to talk. I can tell you by showing you or whatever. So it's a figurative speech. And the Sadigon definitely thinks that a lot of psikim are like that. And Rambam definitely almost never uses figurative speech to explain the Tanakh, which is a weird thing that he does. And the whole point of Vechelek Aleph, he never says this is a figure of speech. He always says this is literal, just in a different way. So, anyways, that's a very interesting thing.
He's probably trying to get you away from right.
No, there's something real going on. No, it's not. The Rambam was a makil, then it's half sense. Anyways, he never said, okay, that's a different shmis. Now, therefore, this is what the soul must be. In other words, it's not that, but it's similar, analogous to that, or maybe even is that. Sometimes it seems to him say it is that, or a part of that. So some kind of thing even more elevated or even more exalted than the sphere, because it has sort of its own light. So in other words, it's called its intellect, because it has intellect, and the galgal does not have intellect. Something else must be moving it, or whatever.
So it has this transparent...
it's both. It has both. I don't know. He might be saying it at least, because again, to him, he's thinking of some sort of. I don't know. What I can make out of what he's saying is he has some sort of ladder of how great.
Transparency is not that it's conducive. That's two different things. I thought.
I'm using it in the same sense right now, but because I don't think transparent is the correct word. I think having the having the potential to receive light is the correct term. And for him, he's sort of thinking of like a ladder of matter. Like there's dark physical things, and then there's and up to the galgal, which is the highest thing, and then he puts the soul one step above that. That's basically what he's doing. So I don't know what he means when he says it receives light, like it's shining, or you could see it. I don't know if he literally means that, or maybe he does literally mean it according to whatever physical theory he's thinking of. But he definitely thinks that it's even more than that. It sort of shines in itself also.
Light specifically, or it could receive? So
light again is for him like the highest thing, because obviously it's sort of true even now, right? It's like it has the most, light has
brilliance.
Yeah, it's also the most free. Like it gets all over. Like it's the most has the largest reign of all physical things. Like it's the king of physical phenomenal light, basically. So
it does have largest range, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean we know that also, but you can notice that from walking outside and seeing the sun. It's not very complicated thing to notice. But I don't know. It's always some people definitely. So some people, I'm gonna tell you honest. Some people read this piece of Rasag and it says, well, he's just talking in metaphors.
Well, he speaks about the soul.
This language, yeah. But Yitzchok Lowy doesn't think that, because I have no reason to think that. I actually, from everything he says, he seems to be saying explicitly that soul is a physical thing. Of course, like I said, because he has different levels of, he doesn't share these people's metaphysics, where there's only physics and non-physics. To him, there's 1,000 levels of physical thing. Then there's God, which is totally different. But other than God, I told you last week, he thinks that the Shekhinah is a physical thing. Right. So why wouldn't he think the soul is a physical thing?
Right. Most Kahana, I think, is your friend here.
Possibly, I don't know. What does he say?
I think this is some of the things.
About Sadia? Where did he talk about it?
I thought so. I have it saved on my phone. I'll send it to you.
Okay, could be. I'm sure there's people, I told you, I am very happy with this theory. In other words, it's probably wrong, but I'm very happy with it as an option. Because I think it's more consistent. Again, it solves so many problems that everyone else seems to have, and when they misread everything, it's at least more consistent. You don't end up with the interaction problem, which is a great thing, and you don't end up with all kind of other weirdness, which you end up like, okay, if it's like the Ramban's problem with not being able to be in space and so on.
How's that?
The Ramban, and it said that the Ramban is the one that I refer to when I say another person that seems to not be consistent. Because the Ramban is very mad at the Rambam for saying that the soul is a non-material thing, or not exactly for saying that, but something like that, because then he says that the soul can go to Gehenna. And very worried about this. In Shara Gehenna is a place, so otherwise what is it? It's also created. It's also described in the Medrash Chazal as a place. Like it has a door next to Yerushalayim and whatever. You could go there, and this non-physical things don't go anywhere. So that doesn't make sense. Therefore, he says, then he answers something like this, says, well, the Gehenna is a place, and the soul can go there, and don't ask me too many questions, but of course the Gehenna is not physical fire, it's some more basics like the elemental fire, whatever, but the soul goes there, and I never figured out what he's trying to say. Either you have to decide, either it's both are a mushal, then you're back in the Rambam land, either none are a mushal, and then your soul is not. So, and he does say this, like the soul, in these letter readings has very similar language. The soul is the most exalted thing ever to be created, and it's totally not a body and totally nothing, but it can go in Gehenna. And of course the Gehenna is not a physical Gehenna, but it's a physical Gehenna, and I never figured out that these two things that he says. That's what people believe. I told you, the Ramban was the Miyasid of Orthodox Judaism, 100%, in theology. And with all the inconsistencies, they all track back to the Ramban. But the Ramban was not as stupid as Lakewood. He did understand what's going on. And I think that if you want to actually make sense of the Ramban, you have to go back to Rav Sadigon. In other words, you have to forget, and I do think that Ramban either doesn't know or doesn't care about this very dichotomic distinction between body and non-body that the Aristotelians had. He definitely, he doesn't even care about God not being a body. He says, thank you, Rama, for letting us know, and let's move on. Something like that. He doesn't really, David never talks about it. Like in all of his, no, he never talks about it. He never talks about it. Even has lists of Ikri Adas where he doesn't describe that as one of them. He thinks Ashkocha is one of them, unlike the Rambam. He thinks, he sees Mitzrayim was one of them and so on, because it's kind of Ashkocha, Chedesh Oila maybe, but he has lists, like in Parshas Yisrael, like these are the Ikra Das, and he never says God not being a body is one of them. he does believe that that's true, but I think that he means it not the way the Rambam means it. The Rambam would say that you have God as a body also. Just again, by the way, everything that I'm telling, I have to do this. Everything that I'm telling you about about things not being a body but being great is the Rambam, and the Rambam making fun of other people. Because the Rambam in the first chapter says something like this, Perek Aleph, okay?
This is the Kappa one?
This is the newest one, no. This is a new one. Anyways, no, not Schwarz. This is an even newer one. It's translated by a Jew named Hillel Gershoni. In any case, he says...
Oh, it's in English?
No, want me to read in English? I'll read it in English. Want English?
Over books?
No, just English. Okay. Read Shlomo Pinhas's translation. Okay, very good translation. He said, the Rambam in the first chapter says this. I'm just showing you that there is such a theory. He says, some people think that it's wrong to say that God is not a body because then he would not exist. They would even make the deity to be nothing at all unless they thought that God was a body, provided with a face and hand like them in shape and configuration. So that's one thing, because he thinks that for them, and that's true. I mean, there's some people that have this metaphysics, they existence and body are the same thing. So if the body is not a body, then it doesn't exist. But then he says this line, however, he is in their view bigger and more resplendent, whatever that word means, than they themselves. And the matter of which he has composed is not flesh and blood. As they see it, this is as far as one can go in establishing the separateness from God from other things. So this is a very important line, because this shows you that, of course, nobody thought that God has flesh and bones. Nobody ever thought, although the Rambam tries to make you think that sometimes when he talks about people like that do have Aksham. Everyone knows that God is more resplendent, okay? What does this word mean?
Oh,
you don't know either, okay? But you know English. Yeah, like I was saying, amazing, great, exalted. Everyone agrees with that. Kadosh, holy, all these amazing with that. Everyone agrees about that God. Just according to the Rambam, they have wrong metaphysics, because they think that only bodies exist. And they would even think that then, if this guy's not a body, of course, it's not made out of flesh, he's made out of light, something like that. And this person literally says that...
Yochanan spoke about it?
No. This person literally says that... Yeah, this is Rambam seems to be talking about Shir Koima or something like that. That's not true. But in any case...
right?
Yeah. But in any case, there's this kind of idea, let's go back, this kind of idea, and I think that very clearly, I do agree, if you don't have a certain metaphysics, then this shit is the right one. It's only if you're a philosopher, and you really believe or understand what body and not body means, that all of this discussion, the Rambam's way of thinking of it makes sense. And since most people don't know what that is, including the Ramban, 100%, no, I'm sorry, I've read enough Ramban that I say this, it doesn't care about it and doesn't really know what it means. Even when he talks about the soul, he makes the same mistakes and so on. So therefore, all you get from the Rambam, and this is true, and if you go on Lakewood, you ask them, God is not a body, what they get from is that he's very what is the word? Yeah, he's more resplendent. But they don't get anything else out of that, because you need to have concepts for this to work. And actually, these concepts are, at least most people would say nowadays, they're outdated concepts, and nobody really thinks in terms of... No, body and not body. Well, I don't even know what body... I mean, according to modern science, nobody knows what the word body means.
Right, materialism is not an active action.
Besides from it, no, body and materialism are not the same thing. Body is body means something exactly that Aristotle defined what it means in the book of physics. And of course you could believe it. I didn't say that nobody believes in it, but I did say that for most of modern people, we don't work with this concept at all. It's not like a basic concept. Okay, is energy a body?
No, nothing.
I mean, and so on. Modern physics doesn't believe in bodies either. I mean, it believes in all kind of weird words, but not bodies. Right. Not in Aristotelian bodies. They don't exist. Of course, you could say in the end they must exist, like one of these neo-Aristotelians. But that's But then you would go back to be able to say like the Rambam. Right. But for the most part, most people don't know that. Most people don't even know yet a lot before. So therefore, it's not relevant. What I'm getting is there's very clearly two ways of talking about the exaltation of things. And if you're not a physicalist, if you're not a Rambamist, if you're not an Aristotelian that has bodies and not bodies, then it 100% makes sense. There's nothing wrong even with having, of course, there are different levels of bodies. Rav Sadigan thinks that the soul is a body, but not the kind of body that you're thinking of. Or, for example, you can't see it. Now, not being able to be seen, even in principle, doesn't mean not body. In the Aristotelian terms, right? Because we can't see radio waves either. We can only see a very small spectrum of light, for example. And if the soul is just one spectrum higher, then you're out of visible light, out of visible things, and still not anything metaphysically different. Mm-hmm. And I think that's definitely the kind of thing he's aiming for with this theory of the soul. And that's what I was saying. The Ramban seems to also end up saying meaning something like this, because like the Gehenim, okay, they're both not physical. So, but not physical doesn't jump you into not body world. It just jumps you out of like the visible spectrum, and to use a modern term, something like that. It doesn't jump you out. It doesn't get you anywhere further than that. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually a very reasonable theory. I don't know why. I mean, it's not reasonable if you're a Platonist or something like that. It's not reasonable. But besides, for anyone that's not a Platonist, then that's very reasonable. And Shawn, okay, so that's the deal, Shawn. And therefore, he says something like this, and he has two proofs for this, like everything else. So he does do this, his two sources of truth. He has a proof from Seichel for this, because obviously the soul is not the body, because it controls the body, and it has wisdom in that sense. Secondly, it's obviously not any other body, because again, those things can't be what organizes the other things. And it can't either, you sort of like, okay, so maybe it's the sphere. It can't be that, because the sphere itself doesn't have intellect. So it must be something above.
When he brought up sphere, he was just
yeah, he seems to be going in this like gaga, in this like.
Body, right?
Before it was just a muscle, but now he's actually comparing it and saying.
Right. You know, if he's I don't think it was a muscle. I think the first line is just saying it's at least as pure, as refined as that.
It is the sphere or not.
No, it's not. Then he says it's not the sphere because then in his proof works by shlila. How do you say? By negating different options, right? It can't be this body. It can't any other body. It can't either be the body of the sphere. So it must be something at least as right. It must be at least as great as all these things, but even more than that. That's the basic logic in his thing, and therefore it's something he only has, like in his world, that's the three kind of things that he could think of existing. So therefore it must be something that's beyond the sphere, so to speak. And then he has a pasuk, and ferish a pasuk in Sefer Daniel, v'amaskilim yaziru k'zayir rekia, which says that. And that's amazing, because if you Mr. Figurative speech can't use that. Can't use that pasuk. And Chacham Rakosef, it says in the third page, and there's like a bold thing. It says I have a proof. He has a proof from the Seichel, and then he has a proof from the pasuk, which says there's two psukim that he quotes. Well, three psukim, but his main pasuk is his pasuk in Daniel. And like I said, this is for Mr. Figurative speech. I have no idea how you claim this to be a proof. Like you're taking very literally something that's obviously a figure of speech. Like your soul, the soul of the masculine is going to shine as the sun. And like, okay.
Like the purity of physical objects somehow lends themselves to more metaphorical use also.
Of course, all of this is very easy to take into a metaphor. I think that he's being real. He's being literal.
What? Yeah.
He takes the pasuk literal.
Yeah, he does. What I'm saying is it's funny that this is the one that lends itself.
And then he says that, but this is only for tzaddikim. If you're a Rusha, then you're going to be lower than the heaven. Like it says that pasuk, Ken b'kedoshav le'yamin, v'shemaim le'zaku ba'ena, v'afki nisa v'nelach ish shoysek ma'am avla. So it says that if God, well, the pasuk is saying God doesn't even trust the heavens, so of course doesn't care about you, bad guy. But he's trying to again use this in a very literal way and say, yeah, so Shemayim, in other words, the tzaddikim that are like Shemayim, they're not good enough for him. Kedoshav means probably Malachim or something like that, even though people shout. And Afki Ish Nesav, so you're lower than the Shemayim somehow. You're still, so it's interesting, you're still a kind of thing that belongs there, but you could somehow be worse. So this is important for him, that this, because again we have to go back, this, whatever the soul is, it has to be the thing that receives badness and goodness in the human virtue sense, because that's the main task of the soul, to be the thing that is good or bad and therefore gets chayva einish, right? And this chayva einish, he over here is seeing it in a sort of a naturalistic way, right? So schar, and he describes this in earlier shiurim in more detail, and he references it.
The Yitzchok that's good and bad, but that's not free will. It has its own.
I don't know what Yetzer Hara. Why do we need a Yetzer Hara here?
No,
Yetzer Hara is not interesting. Yetzer Hara is just a thing that causes you to sin, if it exists. I don't know what he thinks.
The soul, more like
no, but the soul is the subject for that.
Free will.
I don't know about free will. Yeah, he does believe in free will 100%, but that's something that the soul has. Again, the soul is the subject, is the thing that has free will and therefore can be good or bad and so on. But the soul can be.
Also, right?
I don't know. No, why? They can be good or bad. They can get schad. No, he doesn't say they can be bad. He said they can get schad. No, they get schad in a different sense. Okay, no, they have justice, different thing. No, I don't think he needs them to have free will. He needs them to have schad because they suffer, and suffering is not fear.
He's not such an orthodox causalist like Rambam, right?
No. Why? No. Wait. I'm just.
Why does
let's go back.
The animals have free will?
Maybe they don't. That's not right. What you remember.
He doesn't necessarily not believe it.
I don't know. I think that what you're referring to is him saying that animals get reward and punishment, but that's for different reasons, because they suffer. So not because they are tzaddikim at Yishayim. Different kind of thing. What am I saying? No, the soul, whatever the soul is the thing that becomes good or bad. That's the point. It's not. It's enough to just be a soul to be good or bad. You might need also a yatzari. Not only that, you also need a body. Very importantly, you can't become good or bad without a body. That's the next Perek Dal is going to be all about that. You can't have a good or bad soul without a body. That's why the body is almost. You're almost not really a soul without a body. That's really, he gets almost close to that, and not entirely that, but almost.
The body is actualizing it.
Yeah. The body, not actualizing it. It's the action. Actualization. He doesn't have potential in actualization so much. He does have it, but the soul can only act with the body. It cannot act by itself. The soul doesn't do anything. It's an inert principle. Its only point is to be the thing that makes the body act, or to make the body work. But the body is what works. He can't work by himself. He can't do anything by himself, and therefore, all I'm saying is that the soul has to be the thing that becomes good or bad. Of course, he becomes good and bad by doing things with his body, and maybe with the Yetzirah, with all the whole. Whatever, with having a house, with putting a mezuzah. You have to have a lot of things besides for just being a soul to be good or bad. The soul in itself is not good or bad. It's just the kind of matter the soul is. But the soul has to be able to become good or bad, and for him, he gives this description of the soul, since he describes the soul as shining and so on, as becoming sort of darker when it sins.
So what did he say about a soul that is bad?
It's darker than the heaven. It's worse. It's not.
It's abandoning its teleology.
No, it becomes dark. That's what he says. It becomes literally dark.
I'm saying the how. I'm saying in what way?
And I don't know how.
No, but why? I'm saying
it still has its same level of body, right?
Yeah, that's a problem. It seems it's still like has whatever amazing, like it's eternal in the sense of being able to survive. Yeah, you could say it doesn't actualize itself, but he does say something.
There is no light there because of the sin.
You could say something like he says something like it becomes dark. In Bama Hamishi, he has this description. Again, metaphorically, it's beautiful. We always use these kind of descriptions, but he takes them literally almost. Yeah, like it gets, but he describes it as accumulating like dirt, like like the mirror of the telescope gets dirty and now it doesn't get this like that. Look at the shiva. Yeah, he says that, but for him it's literal, and it's not emotional. Almost literal. I don't know how literal. We had a whole share about the yeshiva theory of the soul in one of the first classes. And now you see that it all comes from here. Yeah. So that's very much for him. He's like using that even to almost to prove what kind of thing the soul is. If the soul is a kind of thing that has to conduct light, so it can get dark and then it goes like that's basically the Gehenna. I think something similar. Yeah.
Again, that's not really proof. That's circular.
No, it's proof from the Pusik. It's not proof in itself. Oh, okay. It's the second kind of proof. It's the proof from source text. It's not it's not rational proof. Okay. No, of course not. It's what he calls the Rayim and Akusiv, because he needs everything to have two sources of truth. And then he brings another Pusik which says, again, going to the Pusik that I discussed earlier, I skipped that part, with Riach HaNeha B'Heima Ha'ila Lamala, Riach Ha'adam Ha'ila Lamata. So it says literally that the soul or the spirit of the man goes up. And it says, where's it go back? So not literally to Elohim. Very important for him, because he thinks the soul is not God, it's not part of God or anything like that. But it goes back to like closer to God, which is, God is sort of, not literally, but it goes up to the heaven, basically. He does actually, I see I made another bullet point here, because he does actually answer the question that I had from figurative speech. He says, yeah, it's true that this, I'm going to look at exactly what it says there. He says the psukim are using figures of speech here, but they wouldn't use figures of speech that are totally false, something like that. Let's see his lashon. I see my summary here, but I don't trust myself now, because I didn't ask this question when I was writing it. He says, the Yadati ki aksivim, this is Kapach translation, Ledimias lois legalgalim amazirem, vezois lemata, elem pnei sheidoim le'etzem hazeh. So in other words, he's saying, why would the Pusik talk about the good souls as being higher than the heaven or than the heaven and the soul? It must be like in that category of things. He doesn't actually think that it is a sphere, right? Because so it's not literally true. Even for him, it's not literally true. Because they're kizoyer. Well, it's kizoyer arakia. It's not zoyer arakia. Because the soul is not a sphere. It's something beyond the sphere, right? It's a kind. If you want to ask me what's the closest thing to it, it's like that's the closest thing. But it's in that category of things, that kind of thing. But what he must be thinking of is that comparisons only work within that genus, within that category. Like nobody would say a person is taller than a mouse. That doesn't really make sense. You have to be something. You have to have something. Comparisons, basic. Mostly, you could have figurative language that doesn't listen to that law. But I mean, we do say a person is like a star. He's a star. Yeah, these are like his rules. So he just made up rules of comparison. No, these are Aristotelian rules. For real comparison, the Aristotelian rules do work like this. And for really, like a scientific comparison has to be like you can only be longer than things that have length. And so on. And if you say something, it's sometimes I say like, your sack, someone say your tits are longer than the gullus, that doesn't work. Because the gullus is in time and this is in space, so therefore the pusik, according to him, the pusik wouldn't do that. Understand? Although people do that, so they don't listen to the rules that he said.
Deploys metaphors within the confines.
That's what he seems to be saying. I don't know if this is a real rule. You could think of psukim that do mixed metaphors. I don't know.
Language?
No, it's a rule of logic. It's a rule of scientific comparison. But to him, the pusik should at least ideally conform to the real rules of how the world is organized. And if it doesn't really make sense to have comparison, which is crazy, then if the pusik is comparing the soul to the sun or to the sphere, then it must be that kind of thing at least. That's a lot. I'm just explaining his logic, and there might be a hole in it, but that's his logic that he seems to be deploying here. Yeah, those were just totally figurative. Oh, what's with the... No, he didn't say that they were figurative. He didn't actually say they were figurative. No, he didn't say it's a comparison. He says that it's because it's actually there. Because and for him that's literally true. The soul is in it. He just says you have to read it differently. He says that... Right, he's right. When it says that soul is blood, that means you have to really imagine it saying that the soul is in the blood, like it actually sometimes does say.
Or operates in blood.
No, for him it's actually in a literal sense because it's in. It can be in. There's nothing wrong with it being in. So it's in.
And what about when it says when it says ish?
I didn't pro them. Nerashem nishmas adam, something like that. Nerashem nishmas adam.
They said it, but he didn't bring it up. But you said about.
I think nerashem nishmas adam. Nerashem nishmas adam.
How does he explain that?
It actually makes sense because if sphere is a kind of fire or it conducts something. I don't know. You could sort of. He does now. I don't know. I can't tell you things that he would. We have to think of more.
And that's fire, right?
Yeah, he does. I understand, but it's at least in that world of imagination or of like comparisons. Maybe I don't know. He doesn't ask that question, so I cannot tell you. I said that there's one he does that summer thing, but again, he thinks that's a different kind of rule. Not the same exact answer, but it's a different answer. It's a different rule. If you want to like formalize the rule, the dumb answer is that sometimes we call things for the place where they are. Like sometimes I would say my house is doing something. I don't mean the house. I mean the people in the house. That's the kind of thing he's thinking of. But his rule about atzumas is that sometimes we use a prat for the klal. So atzumas are part of the body, and he doesn't say that atzumas are the soul. He's talking about the body over there, really.
Wasn't what we said for them?
No, dam there's a bunch of different semantic rules here. They have to keep track of. The midas and Torah and Dreshes fam.
Dam was the second.
No, dam is that it's in. No, I connected them, but I was wrong. I might have said that it's the same, but I was wrong. The dam thing is that it's in it.
Okay.
The soul is in the blood, and we sometimes call people al shem mekoimam, or things al shem mekoimam, al shem their place. Like he gives an analogy of the heart being called, wisdom being said to be the heart. Say he's smart, he has a good heart, or something like that. We mean something that's in the heart. And by the thing that he says about the atzumas are actually not the same, because over there he's using a different rule. This is actually a true. If you learn linguistics, you'll have to learn about this rule. I forgot what they call it, but it has a word in modern linguistics where you call thing the klal on the name of the prat. It has a name. I don't know what it's called.
That's how we explain like the five.
That's the sort of like the first, like I think my lips are speaking. I'm talking about the speech, which includes lips, but lips, and of course, like you were right, like you said over there, that it also means specifically lips in some connotation, but yeah, so it's actually a different kind of rule.
It has the word, right?
I don't remember. There's a word for this. No, you're talking about this star. What do you want? No. Okay. Wow, Sean. Anyways, I think that's enough. I think that's enough for today. We did figure out a few things. You want to move on? It's ready now, or it's ready 10:45. I think it's enough for today. So we know what kind of thing this soul is.
No, something that's more conclusive at the end. Curious.
Conclusive in the sense of?
No, I don't know. In any sense. Is there anything that's conclusive at the end?
You want my conclusion, or if that this is his conclusion? The soul is We just got to the conclusion. It's amazing.
The conclusion of the soul, but is there anything else conclusive in this?
Yeah, there's a lot of more important things.
No, I didn't say important. I said conclusive.
I'm not sure what you mean by conclusive.
Is there anything else that you come out an answer to as opposed to just a rebuttal or something in these pages?
Yeah. He goes on to say a lot of more things, a lot of more details on things. Not only the rest of it is not actually arguing with anyone for the most part. The rest of it is mostly, like I said, there's a whole thing about him explaining how Schava means soul and the body together, and a lot of important things that happen to that, and then there's a whole story about what happens when you die, and where you actually go, and all of that.
It was just funny because I
These are important things.
I thought that at least Descartes and his friends Galileo, that they were the leader of this whole that Descartes really wanted